Welcome to episode 285 of Backpacking America. Today I'm with Shifu Steve Jackowicz at Classical Martial Arts of Long Island, his martial arts studio. And he's wealth of knowledge. This dude is like the master of martial arts. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on your show.
Anytime. So give everyone a little bit of background about yourself and why you started classical martial arts and where you're located.
Okay, well, we are in Old Bethpage, New York, here in the middle of Long Island. I've done martial arts since I was 8 years old, and I'm not 8 anymore. It's been a long time since 8. And have gone through a whole host of transformations in how I've approached the martial arts. My background as I went through school and everything went actually into East Asian studies and then went into East Asian medicine. My undergraduate degree was from Harvard, and then I wound up going over and living in Korea for a good number of years and went to school there. Got licensed in doing acupuncture and herbal medicine, and actually went to school and got a PhD studying the history of East Asian medicine and how it split apart into its Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese manifestations. But all along the way, I studied martial arts and then taught martial arts, and was lucky enough to run into a whole host of really good teachers and learn a breadth of approaches. And have a number of really good experiences. And then after my professional medical career kind of slowed down, I worked my last post at the University of Bridgeport, working as the chair of the doctoral program in traditional Chinese medicine. And while there, also teaching in their martial arts studies department, because they did have a program that studied the martial arts academically as well as practically. And eventually, with the changes from COVID and the ownership of the university shifting, that department no longer existed. But with all those changes, I eventually retired from that and opened up here. And though having taught martial arts in many different formats over many years, for a long time volunteering with the Police Activity League here in Long Island, then here this allowed us to bring together all the different approaches. And we've been here just shy of 2 years here in Old Bethpage, bringing under one roof all the different approaches that kind of make up that classical martial arts world.
And I've witnessed a few of your classes now, but I'd say by far one of the ones that caught the most interest to me was your self-defense class. Now, is this self-defense class only for elderly people, or is it for everyone?
No, that's a great question. So we have a class in the daytime. We call it the tactical combative approaches, right? Which is a term we use for methods that are used for self-defense, that are trying to be tactically aware and get you out of a dangerous situation. Simply because it happens in the middle of the day. That class is 12:15 to 1:15 in the middle of the day. The crowd that comes to it tends to be older, so it's not.
Which I thought was great. And I was telling a few of them, my grandparents, when they were older, like 70s, 80s, 90s, they didn't really do much, and it's just it was so surreal to see like a gentleman in their 70s breaking the crap out of a punching bag or like pushing each other over. I was like, wow, that's like a whole departure to like what I'm used to seeing for people in that age range. And I thought that was really cool. And I also liked on the board over there you have the theories behind kinetic linking and angular momentum. And I mean, that's dialectical materialism in its finest. And I love the combination of academia and physical fitness. That's something that I like to approach when I do my weight training, but I've never really seen it done in martial arts. So what led you to more about the academic and the physical application together?
Well, that's a great question. And so there's a lot of parts to that answer. One part to the answer is we tend to think of martial arts in many ways as a type of fitness or a type of physical activity. We have to understand that in the classical world, in classical East Asia, martial arts had many different places in society. Part of it was part of the military. So part of the military was what we now call martial arts, because traditionally you fought with a sword and a spear, and if you were disarmed, you fought hand-to-hand, as even the modern military trains in some level hand-to-hand fighting. Also, martial arts conjoined in East Asia with the temple tradition, with temples, with monks and nuns and these meditative traditions. And in that sense, it was used as almost like a type of physical psychotherapy, where if you're going to sit and you're going to meditate, as in the Taoist traditions, the Buddhist traditions, they sit there, they meditate for a long time. Well, we can talk about the technicalities of how you meditate, but one thing that you do when you meditate is you sit there and you revisit a lot of stuff in your life. and stuff comes up to you because you're sitting there reflecting on it. What's the meaning of this? Did I do the right thing? Did I not? What could I learn from it? But it starts to stir your emotions because your old events, your old experiences have emotions in them. And so how do you deal with that? One way to deal with that is by physical training, by hitting something, right? By breaking through something. Right? We do a lot of board breaking, a lot of breaking. We're part of the International Breaking Federation. But traditionally, when I was in China, and traditionally in the Taoist temples, they break things. Well, they don't necessarily break always boards. They'll sometimes break paper. But on the paper, they'll write down something that's restricting them. They'll write down if they're feeling that they got a raw deal on something. Could be someone who's not a monk or nun, but someone comes in and like saying to the abbot, I have a hard time at work. Someone's holding me back. They write down on a piece of calligraphy paper the things they feel are holding them back. Then they have to, the people hold it, the monks hold it for them, and they stand there and they summon up their force and they rip through it. It's a type of psychotherapy. They rip through, they crash through it. And they're like, you can crash through that thing that holds you back. Why can't you do that in the real world? Why can't you do that? Here's a symbol of that. They call that a fuhao, a talisman. They put the force of the chi in there. Now the monks themselves will often do that, but they'll write down something like discrimination. They'll write down something like some level of persecution in the world. And they'll break a board, or they'll break something, breaking through, feeling that their force starts a wave in the experience of the universe to break through those barriers. So where you said you saw older people doing exercise, hitting pads, hitting boards, learning how to exert power, right? The power that's within them, right? And working that in a self-defense format. That's a really important thing. Most barriers are self-imposed.
Yeah.
Right? And so overcoming that. And that class specifically is focused on self-defense. Hopefully, no one has to use it for self-defense. But some of those gentlemen have mobility issues, right? Some of them have certain health issues that make them more potentially a victim. But training not to have the victim mindset. And training to understand the difference between competitive martial arts, scoring, which is great because we do judo, we do jiu-jitsu, we do those things. We do sui jiao, Chinese wrestling. We do chin na, Chinese locking. We do competitions and go and do this, the different types of point fighting, point fighting, the continuous fighting. We do we just competed in a Kyokushin tournament, which is full contact. We do those things, but in those things, whenever you compete, two people are moving towards each other with agreed upon rules. I'm gonna hit you, you're gonna hit me, but we agree. We're gonna hit each other in the head, in the body, in the leg, wherever it's going to be. We're going to wear certain equipment. Certain things are off limits. You can't hit them in the throat. Can't poke them in the eye. Can't kick them in the crotch. We're going to agree on that. There's going to be a referee to make sure we both follow the rules. We know when it's going to start. We know when it's going to end. We know at the end we're both going to be alive. And one dude's going to win. The other one's going to learn something. Okay. Self-defense is not like that. Self-defense, the other guy picks when it starts. The other guy picks the rules of engagement. The other guy starts usually at an angle you don't see him coming. And you don't know what he's playing for. He may want your wallet. He may want to hurt you. He may be trying to get a gang initiation and hit you because that's what his group wanted him to do. So you don't know what the parameters are. And you're often involved in it before you know it started. So that's a very different thing. And what you're playing for is different than what he's playing for. He's playing for to beat you, to steal from you, whatever it is. You're playing to get away. You're playing to get home safely. So it's a very different parameter because his energy is going towards you, your energy is going away. So now he's the tiger and you're the gazelle. And you got to go. Gazelle's got to go. Now, we have to be a little bit of tiger and gazelle. So if you are attacked, ever been in a self-defense situation, you got to stop the threat, hit this threat, interrupt their narrative of violence, and get to safety. So that's when we train classes like that, that's a different goal, a different approach where we have to train that and train how to get away, engage tactically. That's what we call tactical combative approaches.
I think that's awesome. Especially, it depends on what state you're in too, with varying levels of self-defense. I mean, we should get a lawyer in for this one. But it's important to know that, especially to get away. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all not UFC fighters. We're just trying to go home alive. And I just thought it was really cool, especially for that population, to just learn how to fight. Because, I mean, there's so many people that are of that population that are victimized just simply because of their age. And even, like, people that you would think would be able to fight, not really knowing how to fight. I don't have a lot of fighting experience. But, like, I'm younger, so like I'm not like a kid, but I'm a grown man. Not going to be like the nicest target in the world, but I'm smaller, so it's an option. So it's always something I've always considered with fighting. What I do like about weight training is you have like a little more girth, I guess, so where it's like, okay, that's a bigger dude, but a bigger dude might not always know how to fight. I see this a lot when I do my calisthenics training. I'll have my bodybuilder friends that strictly do bodybuilding. I'll say, why don't you guys try to do something on the gymnastics rings or do something with pull-ups, and they can't do it because they're so heavy and their fine muscles aren't strong enough, or their mobility is shot. So how do you like teach fighting while also teaching mobility?
That's a great question. So the question is, what are you fighting? Who are you fighting? What are you fighting? Right? So are we fighting the other person? Right? Sometimes you are. Sometimes the other person is coming to bother you, and as I said, with self-defense, he's trying to assault you and you're trying to just go home. Okay? You have to realize that when you have a real fight like that, everybody's getting hurt. The old martial arts saying is, when two tigers fight, one is wounded and the other one's killed. Right? So you don't want to be either tiger if you can get out of the situation. But you have to accept the fact that, heaven forbid, you are in a self-defense situation. You're probably going to get hit. You're probably going to get hurt. Or you're probably going to hurt yourself hurting the other guy. You also get hurt emotionally. Nobody gets out of a fight without hurting emotionally, because even if you won, you had to hit another human being. You had to hurt another human being. And you said, not everyone's a UFC fighter. Well, UFC fighters are elite athletes. Right? They're elite athletes. That does not necessarily mean they ever want to actually fight in the street. Right? They're fighting in a very elite sport format. But you asked about mobility, right? So in mobility, part of what we're fighting, inevitably, is time and gravity. Right? Time and gravity, that's the enemy who gets all of us. So time, actually, one of my students said this, and he's actually only 8, but he's brilliant, this little guy. We were talking, because he loves to teach me science as we do class together. Okay, he comes in for private class, brilliant little guy. And we were talking about entropy. In terms of science, entropy.
What's that?
Well, entropy is basically, in a physics dynamic, entropy is where energetic states start to break down, where order is lost to chaos. Right? In other words, we're sitting in chairs. Well, those chairs over time will degrade. They'll dry out, they'll break down, they'll no longer will be chairs. We could sit in them at one point, 10 years from now, whatever, they'll fall apart. And that's just the nature of it. Even if we don't abuse them, they'll fall apart. So that's called entropy, where the structure starts to degrade. That's the same thing with the human body. It's the same thing with structures in general, physical structures. But this little student of mine, 8 years old, we're talking about astrophysics, and he tells me entropy is the expression of time in matter. And I go, well, like I said, this little guy's brilliant. The first day he walked in, he said to me, did you know 1,855 Earths can fit inside the sun? And I said, I did not know that. And I've been teaching him martial arts, and he's been teaching me astrophysics.
That's really cool.
Which is very cool. And so I have to actually go and look things up every week to ask him more questions, because when we start off, he goes, questions? So I ask him questions. And as long as we're talking about astrophysics, we do all sorts of drills, blocking drills, kicking drills, but we have that ongoing conversation because it keeps his mind engaged, because he's very smart.
Wow.
But nonetheless, he said, entropy is time expressed in matter. And I had to think about that a lot. I had to think about that this whole week. I've been thinking about that, week and a half, been thinking about that, like, what does that mean?
Time expressed in
matter. That time, as it expresses itself in matter, changes the matter. It makes it entropic, which means it starts to degrade its relationships. And I said, oh, and that makes sense, because I'm not as young as I once was. I started martial arts when I was little, 8 years old, like that little guy, right? And I'm not. I'm what they technically call in medicine senescent. Senescent is the age where you're slowly starting to slow down. It's the opposite of adolescence. So it's the time before geriatric, but after, when you're right in slap dab in the middle as an adult. They call that senescence. It's a medical term. So, but it's like adolescence is becoming an adult. Senescence is becoming a senior. Okay, so I'm meditating, thinking, doing my martial arts, running class, and I'm like, what is the expression of time in matter? And that's what we say. We always say martial arts, time and gravity. You fight time and gravity. But in many ways, you're dealing with or fighting against the entropy. You're fighting against the systems that degrade, because your body will break them down. It'll break down all the systems that you have if you don't tell it needs it.
Yeah.
That's why I say if you don't use it, you lose it. So you asked about mobility. One of the things is we use it. We make a move in different ways. One of the big things we do all across the board is a very classical martial arts approach. You move in different ways. You get into a horse stance. You move, you stand in a crane stance. But you move in a bear walk. You move in a tiger walk. You move in a cat walk. You move in a crab walk. You move in different ways. You move dragging yourself sideways across the mat with one elbow. It's actually called in Japanese banempi, half shrimp move. The full shrimp move is a grappling move that we use. But the banempi, the half shrimp move, we nicknamed it the one-arm paper hanger, where you have to use one arm and drag yourself across the mat. And all the time we think, oh, older people can't do it. No, people can't do it. I got 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, they can't do it because they haven't experienced that motion. So part of the mobility is experiencing the motion, experiencing every direction. Part of things when you grapple, you go on the ground and you roll back and forth with the partner, trying to pin each other, such like that, is you're experiencing the world sideways, upside down, backwards, in a spherical consciousness. And the idea of how can I create every dimension of consciousness? And if my body can work in every dimension, every angle, that's mobility. If my mind can work in every direction, that's flexibility, right? And therefore, as I said, most limits are self-imposed. Oh, I can't go like that. I can't move like that.
Who said you can't? Yeah,
Exactly.
Have you tried? Well, you know what I find crazy about it is, like, you know, some people will think that, oh, that's silly. I don't need to do this pulling motion to get up off the floor if I fall. But yes, you do. It all comes together. The way I train at the gym, I use the Arnold split. So if I'm doing my chest, I'm working my back immediately after. If I'm working my shoulders, I'm working the entire arm, because the front needs the back and the back needs the front. You need all around, so like you said, you need that circle to be stable. And a lot of older people, they sadly pass away from complications from falling. Osteoporosis is a big thing. You know, doing impact sports, weight training, that helps at least slow the process of osteoporosis in the bones. So if you fall, your complications aren't going to be as severe as if you didn't do anything. And if you have that mobility training, like you're suggesting, with the crane stance, what was that? The paperclip?
We call it the one-arm paper hanger. That's
one-arm paper
It's called
hanger.
the half shrimp in Japanese.
Half shrimp.
So it's almost like a shrimp, but a shrimp has no arms. So you're using your arms. So they call it the half shrimp move. So you're like a shrimp. That's half of your body's like a shrimp lying down.
Oh.
And half your body's being pulled by your arm. But it's a way to move across the mat.
And that helps if you're elderly and you fall and you can't get up.
Exactly.
I mean, you know.
It also, the thing is, falling is a big part of our curriculum. So how to fall, how to roll. We start that with people who have mobility issues sitting on the floor and rolling back on your back and sitting back up. Now, we do more than doing sit-ups or leg lifts. We roll back and sit back up. Roll back and sit back up. It's almost like a type of sit-up, but it literally is your whole body. So that's what happens if you were to fall down. You got to roll back and sit back up. But one of the things it also gives you, rolling back and sitting back up, is a change in proprioception, which is basically a fancy neurological word, which means how you perceive yourself in space. Right now we're perceiving ourselves sitting on a chair, gravity's pulling us down where we are. Our whole body's being mapped by our mind. Stand up, the map changes. Bend over, the map changes. Well, it's not so much when you get older, but if you do not go through a variety of postures, your body erases the map of what it's like to be in that posture. If you're not leaning to the side, playing I'm a little teacup like a little kid, then you basically kind of forget what it's like to be in that posture. So then if you go in that posture, you lose your balance. So moving in different positions, you keep your balance better, right? That's central. That's one really important thing. That relationship of gravity to you is really central. So years ago, I wrote an article. It was an article for a martial arts magazine, and it was called The Fine Art of Ukemi, which is the Japanese term for falling. Subtitle, How I Learned to Love the Mat. But in it, I talked about the relationship of gravity to the person. So falling really makes you have to learn to relate to gravity, to fall backwards, to fall sideways, to fall forward, to roll over, right? So your relationship to that. Well, emotionally, the thing we fall into all the time is love. And you fall in love. Oh, well, the earth pulling you down with gravity all the time, unless you jump in a spaceship and take off, it's pulling you down all the time. So therefore, physically, it must love you in some analogy, because it pulls you constantly. Never lets you go and float off in space. So it pulls you down. So when we're little kids, we learn to fear to fall because we fall and skin our knee. We fall and hurt our elbow. We get to be afraid of falling. Emotionally, we learn to fear love because we fall and we get hurt. Right? We fall in love and get hurt by somebody. So those two things correlate each other. So when we learn falling and you learn how to change your relationship to gravity, the emotional correlate is you can learn to change your relationship to your emotions. And that's a hallmark of the classical martial arts method, is that in the classical world, martial arts were often used as analogies for moral things, analogies for ethical things. So we don't always realize, because we think about, oh, it's a leisure activity. It's a sport. It's something we're going to go do, right? We're going to have fun with it, which is great. But traditionally, martial arts were the ethical training of people. They trained them to behave differently. They trained them to work together, because historically people lived in villages that were about 400 to 600 people. That would be like as if you went to high school and you never left the high school crowd for the rest of your life.
Wow.
Now everybody just cringed. Everybody's listening just cringed because they were like, oh dear God.
Yeah.
Right? And the thing is, how do you deal with those people? Your relationship would need to change because your age changed and what everything went on changed around you. How would you evolve that change when certain parameters like their presence were always there? And the kid who picked on you when you were young was still there. So that's why in the martial arts, this idea of how do we win but not destroy the enemy? How do we preserve the enemy? Even in submission fighting, which is very popular right now with BJJ and UFC, right? Submission fighting is very popular. But in submission fighting, you submit and they let you go. Oh, you got me. It's like playing chess. You got me. Tap, tap, tap. All right, then what? Like with chess, let's play again. Right? As opposed to, it'd be foolish from the classical perspective. I'm not going to tap and I'm going to get broken. They would say, that's foolish. You learn the other guy caught you, but another day you might catch him. Learning that victory comes over time, that victory is perseverance, that victory is something that you experience through the activity, not in a singular event one moment. Right? So that's part of that whole classical wisdom, especially for the older crowd who comes to train with us or the younger crowd. Because the older crowd needs to learn that. We have one of the guys in that older class you visited. He's going into a tournament. He's in his 70s. He's going to his first tournament.
Wow.
He's going to demonstrate forms. He's going to demonstrate self-defense moves. Never did it before. And I said to him, I said, it's great. I said, you lasted that many years on the planet and found something that you haven't done yet. So go do that. It's new. And that's the potential for all this, is to be new and dynamic. And for him, if he had thought, I can't do it. I can only do what I've done. Now he's not flexible mind, and that's what happens with our bodies. That's why we lose mobility. So.
That's why. You know, that's cool. Now, why do you think that mindset changed?
In general for people, or?
Yeah, because I mean, you know, it seemed we shifted from, this is in, you know, Greek fitness too, with how they would practice, I guess, the primitive form of bodybuilding, where it was a ethical and moral lesson through physical application. How did it shift from something so, I don't even have a proper word for it, but so lofty and academic and moralistic to a commercialized sport?
Well, it's a great question. It's a great question. And I think for the people who go deeply into any kind of physical culture and physical exercise, it does cross over into their moral, ethical, intellectual dynamic. I mentioned a book to you at one point, Bill Pearl's Keys to the Inner Universe. And he was a bodybuilder in the period before Arnold Schwarzenegger came up and was one of the people Arnold Schwarzenegger talked about and looked up to. And he talks about bodybuilding as being a spiritual discipline. Very interesting. You see also the latter day sage, Mike Tyson. If you've heard Mike Tyson speak, he has gone through a lot of transformation from who he was in the beginning to who he's become now. And if you hear him speak, he really has explored himself and really come to be in touch with himself. And that's really interesting, that his physical journey has led him into a spiritual journey. And even Bruce Lee, the famous Bruce Lee, has written extensively. You can go and, you know, get books of his and get writings of his where he talks about the crossover. He talks about looking at martial arts in a very Western lens of attributes and qualities, but at the same time, looks at the qualities that make him a better person. How do you become a better person? So I don't think it's necessarily lost. I just think that the mainstream people have somehow disconnected themselves from realizing that. And part of that we can blame on commercialism, right? Part of that we can blame on, the financial dynamic in it. Part of it we can say is like, oh, it's bred in circuses. It's this, gladiatorial thing that we see people fighting, people doing those things. Sure, that's always been there, right? The performance side of it. Part of it's the movies. But I think also what happens is somehow along the way, we got very disconnected in the West between our bodies and our minds.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe that goes back to Descartes. I don't know. I think therefore I am. Right? Cogito ergo sum. But in school, where they're like, well, we have to cut funding, let's cut physical education.
It's the dumbest thing they could have done.
Where they're like, oh, so many of the kids have attention difficulties. Maybe we got to solve that with medication, as opposed to solving that through action and activity. So the idea of having an embodied understanding of your mind, that your mind is housed in your body, right? Did that get lost? I don't know if it got lost, but it got put on the back shelf. And I think it still exists, and I even think parents kind of realize that, but they can't necessarily shift the system.
I even feel like my generation, I've always said, and I have a prediction, I think my generation, as ironic as this may sound, is going to be the generation to end smartphones, social media, and all these things. Not end it, but just severely curtail it for our kids, because we understand that, wow, this is really addictive. Or like I was scrolling through TikTok the other day, and there was a TikTok video, and the guy's like, the millennial generation was really like the last generation to truly just be outside with their friends and just do activities, not necessarily because they like them, but just to be around other people, instead of just doing activities because I want to do this and making it very self-centered about what I want to do, instead of, oh, this is just how me and the group are going to connect together. And I was like, wow, that really hit me. And I'm looking through the comments, and someone said, now you're going to go back to scrolling as if this never happened and reality's back. And I put my phone down, and I just sat for like 10 minutes, and I really just let all of that sink in, because it's very true. We have disconnected massively because we do too much with our phones. Now, social media is a great tool. I think the internet is a great tool. I think smartphones are great tools, but like everything great, there's also downsides to them. You're not going to use a hammer to put in a screw. What was that saying? If all you see are nails, everything's a hammer?
If all you have is a hammer, all you see is nails.
All you see is nails. And that's the same problem that we're having now as a society, where there needs to be a balance. I've seen a lot of content, too, put out by people that they'll record themselves in the gym, and they'll say, oh, like, this is this is how I get right every morning, and how I start by praying, and then I go to the gym to take care of my body. I do something I love. And, all that content's really cool to see, that people are trying to at least find that connection. But then I'm like, you actually had to make a video for it and then post it on the internet to show it, and then you make a whole account that's centered around it, and now you're making money off of it. It almost, to me, feels like, in one way, I think it's excellent that you're providing an example of like what is healthy for other people, but at the same time, you're also disconnecting, because your whole motive is, oh, now it's financial too, now I'm getting paid to do it, instead of just doing the activity as a whole for yourself. You're making it a social media challenge. So we're getting close, but we're not there yet. I don't know if you feel the same way, but
no, I agree. I think one of the biggest things is the question with social media and our online presence and all that is it creates a somewhat false public arena, a public arena that we are part of, yet at the same time it's not organically natural. So we post things. We post an image of ourselves. We want to see a view of ourselves. We want to channel that, presents some view or some views that we like. We like things, we dislike things. The algorithm reinforces our likes and has a bias, and it perpetuates a bias, because as we look at certain pages, like certain things, the next thing you know, those things come up more often. We think the very things we like are the things that are more well represented in the world. So it takes us away from the actual appreciation of how the world is, because the intrinsic balance in the world is not balanced in the way the algorithms work that run social media. So the question is, as you said, turn it off. Do something else, right? Limit the balance to it. It doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that the tools like that start to become entrancing. They draw you in, right? And so you start to look at them again and again, and you can easily lose a lot of time looking at Instagram, looking at TikTok, looking at any of these things, scrolling on Facebook. Are they bad? Well, they're not bad. It's how you use them.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, the content that we put out for your martial arts studio, I mean, I think that's incredibly educational. I think it's fun, and it's a great way to show people, hey, like, you can learn this. Come here and experience it in person. You know, that's when social media is great, where it's like, hey, come here, get in person, learn this for yourself. Don't just think we're not doing this to, because you'll see like some reels where it's like, and they look cool, where it's like, oh, look at this cool fighting and stuff, but it's not calling you in. It's like, look at this. It's like, oh, I wish I could do that. This is like, you wish you could do this? Come here. We'll show you how to do it. You could be like the older gentleman, and you guys will see that soon. The older gentleman pushing each other over. The guy in the chair, you have a gentleman that was, he hurt his foot, and you guys are sparring with him in the chair. I think that's really great to show people, because it's like, look, you can come here and do this no matter who you are. Whether you're injured or able-bodied, there's no excuse. You just have to be willing to do it.
Exactly. And I do think that side of it can be very positive.
Yeah.
And for people to see someone say, hey, that person's like me.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, I could go do this too. That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and the flip side to it, I say to, like, in our Tai Chi class, we're doing Tai Chi, and I tell the students, don't look on the internet too much, because they'll look on YouTube and they'll look up Tai Chi, and they'll see the 2021 Beijing world champion Tai Chi person demonstrating something, and they go, because this person has a stance so low, has a movement so fluid, that they're like, I can't do that. And I always tell the students, I go, don't watch that. Not that it's bad, but that would be like, you want to go ice skate around and have a good time and get some exercise ice skating, and all you watch are the Olympic doubles. You see them jumping, you're like, I can't do a triple camel. I can't do this. Like, that's the person at the highest level of expression. It's the same thing. Can you come in? Can you have fun? Can you learn? Can it benefit you? Can it make you healthy? Can it make you well-rounded? Can it let you have experiences you haven't had before, right? Then it's all wonderful. It's all new and can be vibrant. And that's also what we fall out of when we fall into the trap in social media or in the world of saying, that guy has the one system of what I got to do. And that happens in the gym all the time.
Oh my God, yeah.
Here's the one routine, and I got to do that routine. And the routine is maybe not right for you, or maybe it's boring.
I've seen it so many times with pre-workouts, with lifting belts. Like, I've had people come up to me, they're like, oh, that belt is garbage. Here, try this belt. I'll try it. I'm like, I don't like this belt. They're like, nah, this is the belt you need to use. And, like, you know, everyone tries to, like, it's competing with catching up with the Joneses. You know?
And also the thing is, big concept in the martial arts, excuse me, big concept in the classical martial arts is being what the Chinese call 自然, yourself as you are. So you got to be yourself as you are. So the old Taoist meditative saying is, why does brother alligator bite? 自然, which in Chinese means that's his nature. It is who he is. So just like brother alligator, who will bite you, because that's what alligators do, you got to figure out what you're like. Do you do well with a lot of sleep, with a little bit of sleep? Do you do well with a lot of intense exercise, with a small amount of intense exercise? Do you do well with deep stretches, light stretches? You got to find yourself. Finding yourself and figuring out how to modulate what you do to get the benefit, to get healthier, to get stronger, to defend yourself, whatever it is, but you got to find your way to do it. That's the hallmark of a very classical martial arts, classical health and fitness, right? The adaptation part of it. How do you adapt and say, oh, well, this is the way I can do it? And every little kid knows that. Every little kid, when you ask them, they're young enough, you go, oh, how do you dance? They know how to dance. Then they forget it. Or it's trained out of them. It just changes. Then they have to go learn how to dance, right? So we're ultimately trying only to train to rediscover ourselves. And that's the biggest challenge. And that's why it's never ending, right? Because I'm not myself as I was before, right? Myself from 20 years ago, from 30 years ago, from whatever, is not myself today, right? This is the only self I have right now. How does that self express motion, mobility, power, strength, awareness, right? Strength in the gym, strength at the martial arts studio. How does myself do that? And then how can myself now fit in the world? Not trying to be myself from 30 years ago, not living in my glory days, right? Not living in despair, right? But living saying, wait a minute, there's all this other stuff I could do. Then, like you mentioned, the internet and all that, that's a wonderful tool. Because it can help you organize your trip to Iceland. See what you never saw before, right?
Yes.
It could organize that. Or you're doing the same thing, and you're doing, what do they call that? Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling,
you're looking
yes.
through and you're like, oh no, oh no. And the next thing, the algorithm makes you see 15 more things like that.
You know, it's all mentality and how you use the tool too. Like the internet and social media is a tool, and no tool can be infinitely bad or infinitely good. It's how you use it. It's like using a hammer. You could use a hammer to build a house, or you could use a hammer to smash a window because someone made you mad. I mean, it's the tool. What I find interesting too is the whole, like, there's differences in how people perceive things too, like exercise, right? So there's the Eastern way and the Western way. And I asked you before this, and I'm not sure if I'd be interested to hear your answer. How is Eastern and Western approaches now? How are they different? How do they intertwine? What are the similarities and differences?
That's a great question. So, I mean, it's hard to say in terms of all Eastern approaches, because do we include yoga in that? Do we include Qigong? Qigong is the Chinese term for therapeutic breathing practices that are different ways to breathe. Sometimes some of those breathing practices make sounds and control breath by sounds, making sounds like shh, different ways to make sounds. And those sounds control your breath. Controlling your breath, training your intercostal muscles, training your diaphragm. Well, when those muscles fail, you die. Right? Your bicep doesn't work right, that's terrible. But your other arm maybe compensates. Right? Your leg doesn't work right, that's terrible, but maybe you get a cane. Maybe you ride in a wheelchair. Okay, you can't breathe.
You're dead.
You could be on a respirator, but that's really hard. So training your breath muscles is a big part of these things. And so the Chinese call it Qigong, right? The Japanese call it Qigong. There's terms they use for it, but training your ability to breathe. So one of the big things is that that's the foundation of a lot of what we do. Whether we're talking about the Chinese martial arts, the Japanese martial arts, the Korean martial arts, is training breath, training your breath, training balance, breath and balance, central. And then often doing static holds, standing in a stance, standing with your leg held out, right? Because that teaches you principle of alignment. And then doing motion. Now in the Western gym, a lot of times, people are like, that's boring. However, the wall sit, that's made a recurrence. That's back in the gym. They're like, oh, you got to do the wall sit. It's new. Well, we call the wall sit the horse stance, and it ain't new. It's been around for a couple thousand years. Right? So it's like, if you watch those kung fu movies with the guys with the long beard, Pai Mei, long beard, long eyebrows, there's one famous movie where he says his student doesn't like horse stance. He goes, he doesn't like horse stance. I think he needs more horse stance. So is there a difference? Sure. There's a difference in emphasis. There's a difference in the way we do it. Also, in general, a lot of Eastern exercises are group dynamics. And we always say on the mat, we live and breathe as one. We say we do dangerous things safely. We jump and kick. We use training weapons. They're not necessarily bladed, but they're a piece of metal, piece of wood. We swing them around. We do what we call two-person sets, interactions between two people. We do throwing. We do groundwork. Throwing, someone's going to take you over their shoulder. Right? Groundwork, they're going to put you in a lock where they straighten your arm out. You got to trust them, got to work together. We do dangerous things safely. So there's this constant attention for how we worry about the other. That's very different than when you go to the gym. I mean, the gym's a great thing. Weightlifting's a wonderful thing, okay? It's a great thing. You can perfect yourself. You can make yourself healthy. You're not necessarily always worried about the other guy because you're not working with the other guy. You're working with yourself. Now, playing basketball, playing softball, playing baseball, whatever it might be, you're working with the other guy, your team, the other team, trying to play fair. All those things, all those values are there in sports. But for a lot of people, when they think about exercise, they're thinking about the gym, they're thinking about their exercise class, and they're thinking about themselves, which maybe that's where you got to start. You got to think about yourself to get healthier. But the big difference is we have a very group mentality, and everybody, and even the classical martial arts, we use terms of address, right? So we do both Chinese and Japanese. You mentioned in the beginning, Sifu. Sifu in Chinese, right? Shifu in Mandarin, Sifu in Cantonese means as respected as my father. That's what the word means. Okay. We use the word Sihing, which is older brother, right? We use the term the Sijie, older Kung Fu sister, right? Sime, younger Kung Fu sister. CD, younger Kung Fu brother. We use these terms like they're part of the family. In the Japanese, we use the terms sensei, right? Who is the one who's born before the teacher. Senpai, older student. Kohai, younger student. And we have that very strong family kind of dynamic. So we often, when we line up, they line up in order of rank, we do those, and we say, oh, the senpai, the older one, has to help the younger one. When they get their rank promotions, it says on their rank sheet that they are promoted with the rights, privileges, and responsibilities. And I explain them the rights, they get to stand in a different place in the order. Privileges, learn more things. Responsibilities, teach the people who come after you. They have to work that. It's very group driven. So that mindset's there. And we do a lot of stuff together, right? Kicks together, punches together, throws together. So that's a big thing. So if you like that group dynamic, you might like working out and doing that, right? If sometimes you like to be alone. We do certain things alone, form practices in the air, but if you like being alone, maybe going to the gym. And a lot of our people, train in martial arts and also go to the gym.
It's good to do both, have well-rounded. So what are some classes that you guys offer here that would be of benefit to people that want to just start getting into martial arts?
Well, it's a great question. Depends how you like to move. So if you like slow and steady and meditative, you might like our Tai Chi class. We have Tai Chi class both in the daytime and the evening. If you like therapeutic breathing and things like yoga, we have what we call Qigong, which is the therapeutic breathing practices all by themselves, which you think it sounds easy until you have to breathe intensely for an hour, right? And then you're like, oh man, I know I couldn't breathe so well. We've got classes more in self-defense, right? And then we also have classes that divide between our Chinese curriculum and our Japanese curriculum. Both of those curriculums teach self-defense, weapons, sparring, forms, big movements, throwing, locking. The difference being the Japanese martial arts are more linear, more straight line. The Chinese martial arts are more flowing. So if you like the more flowing, more moving, kind of somewhat dance-like movements, the Chinese martial arts are the way to go.
Cool.
If you like the more linear, direct, kind of very strict movement, then the Japanese martial arts. But I'll mention also, we do have 3 interesting offerings that a lot of places don't necessarily have. We have a class in Iaido, which is traditional Japanese sword drawing. Where you practice with the samurai sword. And you learn the traditions of how to draw the sword out of its scabbard, how to cut with it in the air, and how to put it back. At first, we start with a wooden sword. Eventually, you start to work with a metal sword that has no edge. It's not sharp. Then many years down the road, when you get to a high level, you work with the real sword, with the live sword. And you have to be very exact so you never hurt yourself or anybody else.
Wow.
We don't spar in that method. Those methods it's almost kind of meditative in that we're drawing it, and it's a quest of perfection. So it's called Iaido. And we have that on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. We also have a class in internal martial arts. Now, internal martial arts is an interesting term because external martial arts means moving your arms and legs. Internal martial arts, you still move your arms and legs. But internal martial arts means you start to explore what's inside you. Your breath, your emotions, what balances and unbalances you. You start there. It's traditionally what was taught to commanders.
Wow.
Taught to the commanders because the commanders had to control their emotions, had to lead. So we have a class in internal martial arts, which is interesting because it really works a lot with qualities that then come into motion. It's dynamic, it's active, you move. But it's really, how do you move angry? How do you move if you're scared? We have to emote fear and move despite it. How do you move when you're grief-stricken? How do you move when you're worried? So part of it, we cultivate those feelings and then move through them. So it's a very different way to do that. It's a very traditional way to train. And in many ways, it's physical psychotherapy.
Wow.
Right, there's that. And then there's one more class, which is our Wing Chun class, which is close quarters. Wing Chun is a system, comes out of Hong Kong. It's based out of very close quarter fighting. Close quarter meaning you are standing so close you can smell what the person had for dinner. You're like, onions? So you're real close to them. It's very good for close quarter fighting, but that class is a little bit more intense. It's very much based on, it's a traditional method, but it's based on how to fight close in. So in that sense, there's no high kicks, there's no jumps, there's no fancy schmancy stuff like that, but it's what do you do close in? And that's adults only.
Awesome.
That we teach nobody under 16 because it is really how you make the choice of what you do comes from your personal philosophy. In that system, we say the fist comes from the heart, comes from the mind. What you choose to do, what you choose not to do. So in there, we'd never tell you a list of morals. We'd say, where's the line in your mind of what you would choose to do if you were threatened? You got to find that. It's got to be an expression of yourself. So like all the martial arts, all the classical martial arts, they come back to point back to yourself. As Bruce Lee famously said, it's a finger pointing to the moon, right? All these systems are a finger pointing to the moon. If you look at the finger, you miss the glory of the moon. You miss the heavenly glory, right? So they're all systems that take you to some grander understanding. And they're kind of fun. And maybe that's the secret of longevity.
That's awesome. Shifu, thank you so much for coming on my show. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience before we depart?
I mean, thank you, Anthony. Thank you so much for having me come on here. I'd say, if you want, we give everybody a free trial when they come down. Try it for 2 weeks. Check it out, right? Come see what we've got. Check it out. If you like it, come play with us, right? And it's all just a joyous thing. And that idea that what we practice on the mat, the lessons on the mat, we kind of take out into the world. So, hopefully your path comes and you visit us, or if you're far away from us just hearing the podcast, find a place to do martial arts, check it out. And there's lots of different types and flavors. It's like going to Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. If you don't like pistachio, that's okay. They got Rocky Road. So I'd say to everybody, find what you like and just do that. That's part of the joy and the secret of it all.